Today we're going to continue by talking about the mind-body split, control, cognition, and why thinking took over. In the first video of this week, we talked about why leaving the body behind was adaptive, how disconnection wasn't a flaw, it was a strategy that worked in specific environments. In the second teaching, I want to go one layer deeper, because it's not just personal history that pulled us out of the body, it's also cultural conditioning, cognitive reinforcement, and a very specific misunderstanding of control. Many of the people drawn to this work are intelligent, capable, and thoughtful people. They value understanding, they value clarity, and they trust their minds. So when they hear words like embodiment or listening to the body, they may feel skeptical, or worse, subtly unsafe. This video is about explaining why the mind took over and why that made sense. Now let's start with something foundational. Western culture, especially over the last few centuries, has privileged cognition over sensation, thinking over feeling, logic over intuition, and control over responsiveness. This didn't come out of nowhere. Historically, rational thought was associated with progress, predictability, and mastery over uncertainty. And in many ways, it worked. Science advanced, systems scaled, and efficiency increased. But there was an unintended consequence. The body became something to manage, not something to consult. From a psychological standpoint, this reinforced what's often referred to as the mind-body split. The idea, implicit, not always explicit, that the mind knows best and the body is unreliable. This belief shows up everywhere. We praise people for pushing through. We admire discipline over responsiveness. We equate control with strength. So it's not surprising that many people learned to trust their thinking far more than their sensing. Now let's talk about control, because this is key. Control is often mistaken for regulation, but they are not the same thing. Control is effortful. It requires constant monitoring and override. Regulation is responsive. It adjusts automatically when systems are supported. From a nervous system perspective, chronic control is costly. It keeps the system in a state of vigilance. But control feels safer than uncertainty, and sensation introduces uncertainty. Because the body doesn't always give clear answers, it gives signals. And signals require interpretation. Thinking, on the other hand, feels precise, clear, predictable. So many people learned to rely on cognition because it reduced ambiguity, especially in environments where mistakes were punished. From a neuroscience perspective, this is understandable. The brain evolved to minimize threat. When sensation became associated with overwhelm, conflict, or unpredictability, the system learned to suppress it. Attention shifted upward into thinking, and repetition strengthened that pathway. This is how habits form. What we practice becomes default. So when people say, "I live in my head," they're not describing a personality trait. They're describing a well-rehearsed neural strategy. Now, let's bring this into lived experience. I see this so often in leaders and high achievers. People who learned early that thinking ahead, planning, and anticipating outcomes kept them safe. They became excellent problem solvers, but over time, they lost access to some subtler signals. They didn't notice fatigue until it was severe. They didn't notice resentment until it hardened. They didn't notice misalignment until it showed up as burnout. Not because they weren't paying attention, but because they were paying attention in one direction only, upward, cognitively. And that's reinforced everywhere. In school, we're rewarded for sitting still and thinking. In work, we're rewarded for output, not regulation. In leadership, we're praised for decisiveness, not pacing. So embodiment can feel like regression, like losing competence. But that is a misinterpretation. Embodiment is not abandoning cognition. It's reintegrating information that was excluded. From a systems perspective, exclusion always creates instability. A system that ignores feedback eventually fails. Bodies are feedback systems. They tell us when capacity is exceeded, when something is unsustainable, and when alignment is off. Ignoring that feedback doesn't make it untrue. It just delays the response. And when the response comes, it's often louder. Now, let's pause here. If you've ever felt blindsided by exhaustion, emotion, or illness, that doesn't mean you weren't paying attention. It often means feedback was filtered out for a long time. Now let's talk briefly about emotion, because this is where many people get stuck. Emotion is bodily information. It arises from physiological states. But many people learned that emotion was dangerous. Maybe it caused conflict. Maybe it overwhelmed caregivers. Maybe it wasn't welcome. So emotion was suppressed. And because emotion is embodied, the body became associated with risk. So the mind stepped in as manager. Again, adaptive, but incomplete. This is why many people can analyze their feelings endlessly without actually feeling anything shift. Insight alone does not regulate the nervous system, and understanding does not equal integration. Embodiment is where integration happens. Now let's talk about why people often resist embodiment work even when they understand its value. Because embodiment requires tolerance of sensation, and that tolerance grows gradually. You don't train tolerance by flooding the system. You train it by staying present with manageable amounts of sensation. This is supported by trauma-informed neuroscience and learning theory. Systems learn safety through repetition, not through intensity. That's why this month is slow, why we emphasize safety before sensation, why we don't chase emotional release. Release without safety can reinforce fear. Safety first allows information to emerge organically. Now, let's connect this back to agency again. Agency without embodiment is fragile. Under stress, the nervous system will default to what it knows. If the body is excluded, old patterns will take over. Embodiment stabilizes agency by widening the information available at moments of choice. You don't just ask what makes sense. You also ask what feels sustainable. What does my body say about timing? What happens in my system when I imagine this path? That's not indecision, that's discernment. And discernment requires multiple data streams, mind and body together. Let's ground this again briefly. Notice your breath right now. Not to change it, just to notice. Notice where it's easy, where it's restricted. That noticing is not passive, it's data collection. That's embodiment. Now, I want to leave you with an important reassurance. Coming back into the body does not mean losing control. It means trading brittle control for responsive regulation. It means your system becomes more resilient, not less, more adaptable, more honest, and ultimately more capable of sustaining aligned action. As we close this teaching, I want to offer a simple orientation for the rest of this week. This week, notice how often you default to thinking about your experience instead of sensing it. No correction needed, just awareness, because awareness restores balance. Next week, we will begin working directly with safety and regulation, so the body doesn't just make sense intellectually, but feels safe enough to re-enter your life. For now, let this land. You didn't choose to leave your body behind because you were disconnected. You chose it because it worked. And now you're learning when a different strategy might serve you better. That's not regression. That is intelligence evolving.